Hey everyone, thank you so much for taking the time to watch this. I just feel like if you can listen to me for about 20 minutes, you'll be a lot less stressed with your other classes when we do have to go back to school. So you will get these outlines, but if you want to take notes about this kind of stuff and then like send me a picture of it, I'll even give you some extra credit for that. So let's go through this. The only thing I did not mention was something called independent internationalism, which is basically our foreign policy during the 1920s. It means we're going to be isolationist unless it benefits us, and that's called independent internationalism. We're going to be independent unless it benefits us, then we'll follow through with like internationalism. An example of that would be the Washington Naval Arms Conference. And there was something I wanted to show you. So again, it's called independent internationalism. If you ever see like the 5 powers treaty, the 4 powers treaty, or even the 9 powers treaty, those are all parts of the Washington Naval Arms Conference. Okay, so if you ever see those, they just are all part of the Washington Naval Arms Conference. Next, we have President Coolidge. Remember, he becomes president because Harding suffered a heart attack. His nickname was Silent Cow. Very, few words. When he was leaving California, for example, everyone gave him good hospitality and stuff. And at the end, the governor of California said, "And what do you have to say for the citizens of California for showing you a good time?" And Calvin Coolidge said, "Goodbye." So that just shows you. For foreign policy, with that independent internationalism, you have the Kellogg, spelled just like the cereal, Kellogg-Briand Pact, okay, which said, it was between, our Secretary of State was Kellogg, and then Briand was a French diplomat. So France and America are forming this. And basically there were 62 nations that agreed not to start a war. So they aren't going to use war as an offensive weapon. Now, if they were attacked, that's fair game, but they aren't going to start it. It was pretty weak because there was no way of enforcing it. There was no punishment if you started a war. But that's just an example of Coolidge's foreign policy. Also, y'all know how Coolidge felt about farmers. He said, farmers, they never made money, so why start now? And so near the end of the 1920s, farmers really started to they kind of felt the Great Depression before everyone else did. Remember, they got so many crops and stuff. They were overproducing because people in Europe needed our crops because a lot of their land was messed up. And so they went into debt. They got loans to get better chemical fertilizers and gasoline-powered tractors and stuff like that. And they went into big debt. And now people aren't buying their stuff because the war is over. And so Congress came up with the McNary-Haugen Bill. Okay, so there's Kellogg-Briand Pact, and then there's the McNary-Haugen Bill. Keyword is a bill, so we know that Coolidge is going to veto it because it does not become a law. And the McNary-Haugen Bill said that it was basically, the goal was to provide farmer relief, help with farmers. It basically said the government would provide the surplus 6 commodities at a high price. And those commodities were like cotton, corn, rice, hogs, tobacco, and wheat. And the government was going to buy the extra that those farmers could not sell. And then the government would sell those around the world. Let's say that the government didn't make its money. Then the next year, they would tax domestic sales of these crops to make up for the money that the government lost. Okay? And again, Coolidge, he vetoed it, saying that, farmers, they were already poor. That was a life choice. Also, there was a really bad flood in the 1920s that really hurt a lot of people. And Coolidge said, this is not the responsibility of the federal government to provide direct relief. That's, local charities, state governments, but not the federal government. And then in the election of 1928, so he won in 24 landslide. He said he shocked the nation in 28 by saying he did not want to run. Okay. So next we have the Roaring Twenties. We know the 19th Amendment was passed in 1920. Yay, women. Remember World War I and their contributions. Okay. Alice Paul, remember, she still wants the Equal Rights Amendment. And during this time, a lot of women are so happy with just suffrage that the ERA will lose a lot of momentum, and they kind of just put that on pause. And we'll see the ERA later in the late 1960s, early 1970s. So Alice Paul's movement kind of dies because a lot of people are just happy with just suffrage at this time. Okay, we know that morals are going to really change in the 1920s. We know that Margaret Sanger is still around. Remember, birth control is still not legal, any type of birth control. That's until 1965. But, you know, she's having conversations and kind of breaking that taboo. You have Sigmund Freud, who's talking about, sexual repression basically leads to mental illness. So that's going to encourage, okay? You also have promiscuous dancing like the foxtrot and the Charleston. And so that's, those dances are accusing of, fast dancing and like basically being promiscuous. People would also go to jazz clubs really with that fast music. We also know too the epitome of like the woman of the 1920s is that flapper look. And that nickname, the flapper, people think it's about the hats, but actually they would wear these boots and they would dance so fast that the rubber boots would flap, so hence the name flappers. And most women were not flappers. Most women were not flappers, okay? Just a younger generation, just a small amount, okay? Not a majority. Women started to smoke, okay? And that definitely broke barriers and boundaries. And there was even a famous ad during this time. Lucky Strike said cigarettes were torches of freedom. So you can see that audience is geared toward women. Okay. 1/3 of the population smoked during this time. And again, especially for women, this is a way to rebel. Some women started to wear these flappers, started to wear heavy makeup. And there was an ad that said hope in a jar. Okay. For women, usually prostitutes mainly wore before this, wore like makeup, okay? Also driving. Women would, break boundaries and show their rebellious side by driving, which was definitely like a no-no for society during that time. But here, and they also had bobbed hair like men, okay? Now here's the thing that y'all definitely need to know. This was like a phase in someone's life. When someone got married, when a flapper got married or settled down, like they abandoned that lifestyle. So this was not like a whole life thing. It was a chapter of someone's life, okay? And divorce laws, 1 in 6 marriages were divorced by 1930. Education, 25% of women will graduate from high school. So that's great. But for medical school, for instance, they actually put a quota, a 5% quota. So if all the whole, incoming medical school class, only 5% could be for women. Okay. All right. So next we have consumerism, remember, like buying things. And during the 1920s, there's going to be a lot of consumerism and materialism. Okay. I do want to point out electricity. 60% of homes in America were electrified, like they had electricity. New products. Okay. 1930s, the radio is going to be huge. By the end of the 1930s, you'll have over 800 channels. Okay. And again, that was a big way for, to ads on the radio. Okay. You also have mass-produced clothing during this time. So people are going to buy things out of want, not out of need. That's that conspicuous consumption we talked about in the Gilded Age. Definitely the 1920s. They don't need a lot of stuff, but they will buy a lot of things they want. You even have fast food. A&W is the first fast food restaurant in America. You also have chain stores like Piggly Wiggly. Okay. And they're going to drive out those mom and pop general stores. Advertising, people start getting jobs for advertising. People would mail out flyers, definitely the radios, even movies. And there's a guy you need to know. His name is Bruce Barton. Okay, and he wrote a book called The Man Nobody Knows. Okay, it's just the epitome of consumerism in the 1920s. The Man Nobody Knows is actually about Jesus and saying how he was the best salesperson. He had 12 disciples who spread the news, and it was basically how you could look at Jesus to become a better salesperson. Okay, and this was, I think one of the top selling books in the 1920s. So that just shows you, if people are reading that, they definitely, it's all about consumerism. Okay, so for the radio, in 1920, there's a radio station, KDKA, just the 4 letters, and they announced Harding's victory in the election of 1920. Okay, by the end of the 1920s, I already told you 800 radio stations, and 1/3 of homes in America had a radio. Okay, main radio companies during this time, you had NBC, which is the National Broadcasting Company, still around today. CBS, Columbia Broadcasting System. You know that soap operas, news, sports, even Miss America, that pageant's going to be broadcast on the radio, and baseball with Babe Ruth. The first TV will be invented in 1927, but it is not available for consumers yet, not available in homes. Think the 1950s or late 1940s for that. Mass circulation of magazines. You have the Saturday Evening Post. Norman Rockwell, was the main illustrator there. You also have Collier's, who's still around, Reader's Digest and Life. The first talking movie was Al Jolson's The Jazz Singer. Okay, and people thought that it was ridiculous, that it was stupid to have a movie with a talking picture. They thought it was crazy, and ended up being a sensational hit. And so a lot of people who had horrible silent movie stars who had horrible voices, they're just very annoying voices, a lot of them lost their jobs for good because their voices were horrible. If you ever seen Singing in the Rain, it does a really good job of talking about that. Also, you'll have the first animated short movie. It's about less than 10 minutes, but it's Steamboat Willie. Walt Disney created it. And it's Mickey Mouse, Minnie Mouse was on there, and it was, had sound, so that was a big hit too. You also will have MGM, Warner Brothers, and Columbia Pictures will be formed. Okay. I do want to point out in the 1920s, there are a lot of mill towns in the South, like Arnco Sargent. That's kind of random. The automobile, okay. By 1929, the automobile industry will replace the railroad industry as being the #1 industry in America, okay. And in 1929, about one family owned a car. It was basically one per family. So that's huge, okay? The Model T, we know about Henry Ford's Model T. It cost between $300 and $400 back then, and it was definitely more affordable. The reason it was more affordable is that Henry Ford borrowed Frederick Taylor's idea of scientific management, and sometimes he didn't use the conveyor belt, but sometimes it was just before that, it was just the idea of let's just put you in this area where you're doing all this stuff, the same thing the whole day, so you don't have to waste time by moving. Like maybe at night that people would move, okay? The stuff. The gasoline age, it was only 25 cents per gallon back then, okay? The main competition for the Model T was the Oldsmobile. The reason is it was kind of luxurious. You could pick any color you wanted to. The Model T came in black, or black, because it was all about efficiency, okay? The Oldsmobile was very similar, but it said you could choose whatever color you wanted. So then what's going to happen is Ford will come out with the Model A, which is basically the Model T, but you can choose whatever color you wanted. Chevrolet, General Motors had Chevrolet as well during this time. Now, Fordism, like Ford and then ism. Fordism is a word in the industrial area of America that basically it's the idea that the workers are being treated as machines, overworked, doing the same thing repetitive. It can be dangerous because it's so repetitive. How companies aren't really caring about the human, they're just caring about the production parts. That's called Fordism. I do want to point out with cars, in 1920 you had 8 million cars registered. 1930, 23 million cars registered. Okay, 60% of Americans owned a car. All right, so next I want to talk about immigration restriction in the KKK. We know the KKK is going to be reborn in the 1920s in Stone Mountain, and a big push, that pre-context, is that epic movie, Birth of a Nation by D.W. Griffiths that came out in 1915, okay? And we know that during Reconstruction that the KKK was about just white supremacy. Now it's about white supremacy, but also Protestant supremacy, so anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, and also native supremacy, think born in American. So they're anti-black, anti-foreign, anti-Catholic, anti-Jewish, anti-pacifist, anti-communist, anti-internationalist, anti-bootlegger, anti-gambling, anti-adultery, all these different things that this just shows you that challenging the new ways. And Hiram Wesley Evans, you can see that right here, Hiram Wesley Evans, okay? He was the imperial wizard in 1922. But eventually, I know in Indiana, for instance, the guy there, one of the head guys there, was found guilty and accused and found guilty of murder, and there's a lot of fraud in the KKK, business fraud and stuff, and so it'll kind of go back down. We'll see it though in the late 1950s and 60s again. Okay. The last thing I want to talk about is immigration restriction. Okay. We know about nativism. Remember the APA and the Know Nothing Party. Okay. 1920s. Think the KKK. Okay, is your main thing there. And again, competition for jobs. Every time, synthesis, competition for jobs. And after World War I, a lot of immigrants are coming to America like crazy. And we're scared. Remember the first Red Scare, the bullshit revolution. We're worried about that. We're also worried about Japan, all that. So we want to close our doors. And even the president at the time, Coolidge, said, America must be kept American. He's the president when these two acts I'm about to talk about. So he's the guy. America must be kept American. Okay? So, the first act, okay, is called the Quota Act, okay, and it took the data, the census data from the year 1910, and said 3% of what, so in France, okay, if 100,000 people from France came to America to live in 1910, okay, that would mean only, that was 100,000, that means only 3,000 could be in America at that time. They shut the doors and no more French immigrants can come to America. Okay, so that's very strict. Then they're going to make things a lot more strict. You have the National Origins Act. Okay, this is 1924. Quota is 21. Okay, National Origins Act is 24. Okay, and it said instead of 1910's data, we're going to look at 1890's data. Now think about those new immigrants. They didn't really start coming until 1890. So a lot of those Eastern and Southern Europeans and like Jewish people, Japan, all that kind of stuff, like no, like out. They don't even have data. And so they're saying now they're going to take it to 2% of 1890. So again, quota is 3% of the 1910 data for each country. National Origins is going to take it down to 2% of 1890 census data. Again, a lot of those new immigrants we talked about in the last semester, they're not going to even be considered here. And it basically completely banned Japanese immigration. It did, see the check mark, Western Hemisphere, you were allowed. So a lot of Canadians and Mexicans will come to America. They're allowed. But a lot of other people, shut. So, yeah, there's that. Let's see. So, yeah, if you want to take a picture of your notes that you just took and send me a picture, I might give you some extra, I will actually give you extra credit for that. And I'm about to post about 45 points on a quiz worth of extra credit that's due today. So go check mrshammondhistory.com. Thank you.